Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out for our second ever Pint of Science event in Tampa. For those of you who haven't already seen my ugly mug associated with the organisation, my name's Pint. And if you haven't already picked up a Pinto card, and should you wish to play and try and win a coveted Pint of Science pint glass, you can do so now. So the idea is, as the speakers do their spiel, you tick off the words that they come up with, and you yell Pinto when you've got it. So I should actually get on to the speakers, I guess. You're not here to listen to me. The first one this evening is a very good friend of mine and actually my boss, a nice chap called Tom Taylor-Clark. We know each other from having done our grad studies together in London, and when he offered me a job in Tampa, I probably foolishly agreed and said yes. He is a neuroscientist, and after having lived in London, he moved up to Baltimore, to Johns Hopkins, and decided after, I think, 5 very cold winters, there were certain parts of his anatomy that were not tolerating it so well anymore, so he and his family moved down to Tampa. And as much as we love to talk about the weather, this is actually associated with his talk this evening as well, because he's going to be talking about the sensory system. And so I introduce to you Tom Taylor-Clark, and on the subject of pain. Yes.
Parker and I may come from the same country, but we're different height. Okay, so I really appreciate everyone coming out and listening to me. I'm going to talk to you about the connection that there is between taste and pain. And I suppose I'm going to start off pretty simply, really, to say that as multicellular organisms, we need to know about our environment. That's pretty obvious, really. You need to be able to find food, you need to find a mate, you need to find shelter, and you need to avoid being predated upon. And so in order to do that, evolution has designed various systems to help you know about your environment. One which you guys are probably very familiar with is the immune system. The immune system, it detects various pathogens inside the body and then starts creating responses to those pathogens. So you maybe produce more antibodies and then your body gets better. Okay, these things take a long time to occur. You produce antibodies over days, maybe hours. It's difficult to find a mate when you move every day. That's hard. You need to be able to move quicker than that. And so the body has developed other ways of sensing the environment. And this is clearly a neuronal talk, because I'm a neuroscientist, so I'm going to talk to you about sensory nerves. So what do I mean by sensory nerves? This is pretty simple, yeah? These are nerves which sense things. Now, you probably are aware of when people talk about nerves, they talk about the brain. The brain is incredibly complex, and I know nothing about it. It has trillions and trillions of neurons, and the number of connections between those neurons could potentially add up to more than the number of atoms in the universe. This is a very complicated organ, and I have no wish to study it whatsoever. What I have studied is the sensory nerves. Now, sensory nerves are very simple. They're literally parallel lines coming out from the brain and going to various organs. And it gives you information about your environment. So what do I mean by information from your environment? What I mean is it gives you sensations. So how many sensations do we actually have? Well, we could ask an elementary school kid and they'll say we have 5 sensations. And I'm not going to list them because you know those 5, but actually we have many more sensations. For example, we have the sensation of proprioception. Now, that's a very fancy word, but what it means is you know where your limbs and bones are. So let's do an experiment. I've had a pint, so it might not go too well. If I close my eyes and extend my hand, I will be able to connect these 2 fingers. Maybe not after a pint. And I see the lady in the back has had some as well. Hey, yeah, okay, close enough. Yeah, close enough. Now, if you only had touch and sight, you would not be able to do that. So I have some kind of sensory system in my body which tells me where my limbs are. That's really important when you're running. You don't have to look down constantly to know where your feet are. Okay? Refreshment. Okay, so that is one type of sensation, but we have many other types of sensations. Sensations like, let's come up with something a little bit closer to touch, shall we? What about temperature? Now, when you put your finger on a warm surface, it feels, it's the same surface, so you're touching warm wood or cold wood, and it's touch. You've got touch, but you've also got temperature, okay? So you've got a different sensation. And these sensory nerves, when they're activated, can elicit many different types of response. We've talked about one response, which is sensation. But there are some stimuli which cause other things other than just sensation. They can trigger reflexes. So, if you imagine I am getting up in the middle of the night, because, you know, I'm getting old, and I need to visit the restroom. And it's dark, and my proprioception is not as good as it once was, and I will stumble into the bed frame. I will evoke a reflex response, and that will be a withdrawal, swift withdrawal of my foot from the offending area. It will also evoke a behavioural response, which will be, and I understand my daughter is sitting here, one of a 4-letter variety. This may also evoke an emotional response, which is, I can't believe I did that, I'm such an idiot. And then maybe it will even evoke a behavioural and memorial response. I will try desperately to remember where my bed is next time. Now, this is all the sensory nerve information from one stimulus when I stub my toe. Now, that is a stimulus designed to, I don't want to use the word design, that's terrible, adapted to help me learn about my environment. Now, some stimuli are really pleasant. Let's think of when you smell like something amazing like baked bread, and you think, oh, I could really do with a baked bread product right now. That would be great. So, these sensory nerves produce loads of different types of sensations, loads of different types of reflexes, behavior and emotions and so forth. And we'd really like to learn about why these are. Now, you may say, yeah, like I don't care. I really don't care about this. And I would say, okay, fine. But there are some sensations which are truly debilitating. Now, the smell of fresh bread has never been debilitating to anyone's life. However, things like stubbing your toe could be debilitating, but really just learn where your bed is. What about other things which are truly debilitating, like things like cancer pain, or there's something called neuropathic pain. Now, pain, I think we're all familiar with. Pain is an incredibly educational sensation for everyone. And this is a vital part of life, in fact. So that you learn when you're a kid, when you're 4 years old, not to put your hand on the stove. I mean, we all do it, but we all do it once. You touch it, it burns, you learn. You don't need your mother to tell you that was a stupid thing to do. She will say that, of course. But you will learn because it's such a substantial sensation. It teaches us not to do that again. So that's good. Yeah, I don't want to get rid of pain. But what happens if you have pain constantly? That's a bad thing. That's a really bad thing. And in fact, cancer pain is one of the most unbelievable sensations for people to experience. And they would rather die than experience that pain more. So we would like to understand about how these sensory nerves transmit this information, and how, if we know about this, if we know about how these nerves work, then maybe we can help people. And it's not just about pain. See, I've spoken about pain because it's a really easy thing for you to understand. All of you have experienced pain. not emotional pain, this is not an emo-like talk, but physical pain. That's a bad thing. But when we spoke about sensation, so pain is a sensation, there are also reflexes. Now actually there are some reflexes, what we call defensive reflexes, like me removing my foot from the offending bed. A reflex can also be debilitating. So particularly in my field that we study the sensory nerves in the lungs. A cough is a defensive reflex. Now a cough is an amazingly useful thing when you're sitting there and eating your cookie and a little bit of the cookie falls apart and goes down your trachea, your windpipe, instead of your esophagus, then you're gonna die. And you cough it out in order not to die. This is an amazing reflex. I love it. Let's do this, okay? The problem is that there are some people who cough when the cookie isn't there. When the crumbs are not going down your trachea, they will cough 400 or 500 times a day. Now this sounds like, it's a cough. Get over it, pal. But this happens for 6 months. You're going to ruin your life. You're not going to sleep. Your wife will leave you. It's terrible. It's no joke. It's really serious. And cough is one of those chronic reflexes that we can't cure at the moment. So we want to know why. Another type of reflex is urinary urgency, for example. This is not pain. Cough is not pain. But this is a reflex that people experience and we want to be able to control it. Okay. Break. So, like I said, pain is a real fantastic sensation, but we wish to be able to learn more about it. So how do we learn more about it? Well, about 100 years ago, some very fine scientist called Sherrington, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, but he's a genius and he got a Nobel Prize. He worked out that there was a set of nerves in the body which were designed to sense your environment. Not to tell you about where the amazing baked goods were, but to tell you about what was dangerous in your environment. And it's really important to remember that your external environment, the moccasin snake in the swamp, or the bed frame in my bedroom, that's dangerous to my physical state, but also the internal state. So if, for example, you have an infection in your foot, you wish to feel that infection so that you can then go easy on your foot and hopefully make yourself better. So Sherrington said there's these nerves. And people said, okay, great, there's these nerves. What should we do about it? And he said, well, let's activate them and study them. Okay, that's great. How? How do we do that? We take an animal and we say, let's give it pain. Well, we could like go around with a lump hammer and smack animals, but it doesn't really sound very scientific. You can't reproduce the data. Once you hit an animal with a lump hammer, it tends not to get up afterwards. So what we need is a selective stimulus. Now, we talked about when you put your hand on the stove and it burns. So let's use heat, okay? Let's use heat. Let's put some animals on some hot plates and see them jump around like that. That doesn't work very well either, because it's very, what we call in science, it's non-reproducible. Obviously the animal is in distress, but we can't study the nerves while they're jumping around like this. That's hard. So what we needed was some selective stimulation of these nerves. So then we can record the nerve activity and learn more about it. It's pretty simple stuff. Well, what were we going to use? Well, people tried everything. They just looked through the chemistry department and they started putting things onto nerves, putting things into the skin of animals and see what happened. It was a barbaric time. I know, it's terrifying, isn't it? Yes, it is unpleasant. But hopefully what I'll explain to you in the next 5 minutes, or probably 7, because slow down, is what we have learned and hopefully how that will benefit people's suffering. Okay, so what we found was that people started thinking kind of evolutionarily, and they started asking, well, what do we like to avoid? That's a strange way of saying it. What do we avoid? And people started thinking about what we eat and how sometimes we eat things which don't taste very nice. And so taste is a sensation we're all familiar with, and you've seen those silly maps of the tongue where there's the salt bit here and the sugar taste there, and that's not true. The tongue is covered in taste buds, and they sense 5 tastes, 5 flavors, and we can all name them, I assume. We can salt, sugar, sour, bitter, and umami. Thank you. Savory, okay? Now, what is the most aversive taste? It's not sugar, that's for sure. It's bitter. When you eat something bitter, you go, ugh, it's not very nice. So, scientists found some bitter things. So, if anyone's ever drunk a gin and tonic, you've had bitter taste in your mouth. It's quinine. It's a bitter substance. Well, so what they did was they saw if you could activate nerves, these defensive nerves, with quinine. Did nothing. Okay, well, that was a crappy idea. And then someone said, hang on, there are other tastes apart from these 5 tastes. When I eat a curry, it's hot. It's painful sometimes. Why don't we use those kind of pungent flavors? And so, if you guys have ever had a curry, and I assume you all have at some point in your life, they injected the pungent ingredient in curry, which just happens to be from the chili pepper. And this is something called capsaicin. And when they inject it into the skin of an animal writhed in extreme discomfort. People thought, that's great, let's do that some more. And so they injected themselves with capsaicin. See, it's equal opportunity. And they had a dramatic, painful response. And what else did it feel like? Any guesses? It was hot. Thank you very much. It was hot. It was painful and it was hot. And they thought, this is fantastic. We have a stimulus for these nerves. We'll get to why this is important, but you know, the story's slow. So they found that they had a stimulus. And it wasn't from bitter, it was from this other taste. Now, if you are a scientist in the taste field, they say that capsaicin is not a taste, it's a sensation, which I find pedantic. But because it doesn't activate the taste buds, it actually just activates the nerves which innervate the taste buds. Now, this may sound like a little bit of pedantry for myself, but it's really important, this, because you don't have taste buds in your skin. You don't have taste buds in your lungs. You don't have taste buds in your heart. You don't have taste buds. Do I need to go on? You don't have them except on your tongue. But you do have the sensory nerves which innervate those taste buds throughout your body. And someone said, I reckon capsaicin will activate sensory defensive nerves in the skin, in the lungs, in the heart, and indeed they do. It goes crazy, these nerves. They do this, and this is what I say in my medical school teaching. They go, this is the nerve firing electrical signals, and you can record it, and it's great fun. Now, what people found when they used capsaicin was it activated these sensory nerves, but what did it not do? It didn't evoke touch or a sensation of touch. So when they injected it into the skin of people, because you can't ask a mouse what does it feel like, you just see it wriggling around on the plate, and you ask, are you okay? They don't, they're not playing ball. But if you do this with an individual, they said, yeah, it's really painful and it's kind of hot and no, I don't feel touch. Well, do you feel itch? No. And people started thinking, capsaicin activates only one type of nerve. There must be others. And so some bright spark who was brushing his teeth one day said, this feels cold. What did they put in this? Well, they put something called menthol, which is a compound which comes from mint. the flowering plant mint. And when they injected this menthol into the skin, the animal went, oh, this is terrible, it's painful. Okay, fine, let's do it to humans. Okay, I'll do it, okay, inject. And what did that person feel? They felt pain, but also they felt cold. And now the researchers started saying, this must be that there's different types of sensory nerves which are involved in defense. So we're starting to see a pattern of how these nerves work. You still don't really care about this so far, it's just a cunning story. And this is where it got to in about the 1980s. And people started saying, you know, I wonder if the capsaicin nerves, the capsaicin sensitive nerves, are also those nerves which transmit the intensity of heat. Oh, what a good idea. So what they did was they looked at all these different nerves, and you can study them in various ways, which I'm not going to bore you with. Just trust me, you can study nerves. And when you looked at the nerves and you gave it some hot solution, some hot liquid on top of the nerves, maybe 30 out of 70 fired, and you saw them activated, and then you stuck on chili powder, capsaicin, and the same 30 responded. So now people start saying not only are there specific types of nerves, they have a specific function. And this is where it got to until about 1997. And that's when the whole of biology changed, because then we had the Human Genome Project. And we had not just the events for the Human Genome Project, which described the entire of the human DNA, but we also started doing this for every single laboratory animal. And now the Genome Project has expanded to virtually every species on the planet. It's pretty incredible. And so what they knew was the DNA of humans, and they knew the DNA of mice, because let's face it, that's what we're talking about here at the moment, is mice. Now, why is that important? Why is that the key to all of this information? Is that now we knew what the sequence is for all DNA. Now I'm going to take 1 minute to give you a primer on what DNA does. DNA is used to transcribe into protein. Now you guys are like, yeah, I know what protein is, I eat it. Okay, it's in steak. This is true. Protein comes in loads of different types. Protein can be structural, so it's part of the muscle. But also proteins do things, like enzymes. You guys must have heard of enzymes, that you get them in like facial cream and stuff like that. Enzymes are proteins. They're different types of proteins to structural proteins, but they're proteins nonetheless. And DNA, the information in DNA tells you what type of protein you're going to get. And there's one other type of protein, which is a sensor protein. And these proteins sit around on the cell, waiting. They're not enzymes, they don't do anything, they're layabouts, lazy. They're like bouncers. And they sit there waiting for something to trigger them. And then they spring into action. Sensors create these neuronal responses in response to stimuli. So what these people were able to do in the late 1990s was they were able to go there while reading the DNA. And they said, I reckon that the capsaicin receptor is that part of the DNA. Now this sounds like, yeah, whatever, no one cares. But it's really important, because once you know the DNA of something, you can make that DNA. And you can make the protein from that DNA. So we can recreate one part of the body in what is basically called an empty cell. And once they took this little stretch of DNA, put it into the cell, and it made a protein, then that cell was now sensitive to chili. Without that little bit of DNA, the cell did not care. Chili is not dangerous. You feel it's dangerous. But now this cell felt it was dangerous. And I'll tell you the protein that that DNA made. And this name will go down in history as the worst name in science. It is, and there'll be a test, transient receptor potential vanilloid 1.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible. And so we like to use the shorten to TRPV1. Okay, great. So now we have a protein, and when you express TRPV1 in a cell, it is capsaicin sensitive. Who cares, you say? No one cares yet. Furthermore, you could do something cunning to mice. We can't do it to humans, but we can do it to really, really small mice, which is you can change their DNA. So that now, when they grow up, they don't have a tiny stretch of the DNA. So you can knock out one gene. It's a mouse, it looks like a mouse, everything's cool, but it doesn't have TRPV1. When you then put capsaicin into this poor animal, it does not care. It walks around like no problem. So what this says is that capsaicin doesn't activate the nerve through some magical way. It says that you need this one protein to transduce the information from capsaicin, which, let's face it, if anyone's chopped chili and then rubbed their eyes, they know how painful it is. It's really painful. Well, these mice didn't care. I was like, whatever. So, what this said was capsaicin activated nerves, sensory nerves, just through this receptor. Who cares, you say? Good point. This is where it now gets important. Because what people said was, okay, so we can knock out this receptor and show that this receptor is important for capsaicin. What about other sensations? And so they took these mice, which didn't have TRPV1, and they put it on a hot plate. And the mice just stood there. It wasn't painful. You found that the receptor for capsaicin was also the heat receptor. This is incredible. Furthermore, they gave the animal inflammation. So they kind of gave it sunburn, or they made it allergic, this kind of thing. And you know about inflammation, you've all had inflammation at some point. It makes things painful, doesn't it? Well, when they gave it a sunburn, and you know when you have a sunburn, everything now hurts. If they did this, yeah, I'm getting there, come on.
You weren't lying.
What? When they did this, the animal no longer experienced that inflammatory pain. Okay, so we've gone from, yeah, okay, you're telling me about foodstuffs, no one cares, to knowing, because we use that foodstuff to identify the nerve, to identifying the molecular mechanism by which inflammation causes pain. This is a huge leap, because now you can make a drug which blocks this receptor and we can decrease pain. And in fact, these drugs are still being developed and they're going on trial for various inflammatory pains, cancer pains, and so forth. It's fantastic. So, one thing you may ask yourself is, if capsaicin is not inherently dangerous, why do we think it's painful? Well, we know it's painful, but why does our body get activated by this thing? And why does it cause such pain? It doesn't benefit us in any way. Well, if you think about it, and it takes a bit of evolutionary mind bending, but the plants which produce chili are only about 100 million years old, okay? But TRPV1 is in all vertebrates. It's in all invertebrates as well. So you can take a tiny Drosophila fly, which separated from the mouse and human 550 million years ago, and they also have this TRPV1. The evolution didn't make TRPV1 to be offended by capsaicin.